job advertisement appeared on an obscure employment website at 2 in the morning. Janitor needed for secure underground facility. No experience necessary. Excellent pay and benefits, must pass background check, and be comfortable working in isolated conditions. Apply immediately. Thomas Chen had been scrolling through job listings for 3 hours, unable to sleep after another rejection letter. He was overqualified for most positions and underqualified for the rest, stuck in that terrible gap where his degree meant nothing and his lack of connections meant everything. The pay listed for the janitor position was triple what he made at his current retail job. He submitted his application before he could talk himself out of it. The response came within minutes, an automated email with a link to a background check form and a request for his availability for an immediate interview. Thomas filled out the forms, his curiosity growing with each increasingly invasive question. Had he ever been diagnosed with claustrophobia? Did he have family members who would notice if he disappeared for extended periods? Was he comfortable with classified information? By the time he finished, dawn was breaking outside his apartment window. His phone rang before he could even close his laptop. The voice on the other end was professional and clipped, identifying itself only as recruitment. Thomas was told to arrive at a specific address on the outskirts of the city at noon. He was instructed to bring identification, but no other personal belongings. When he asked what kind of facility it was, the voice simply stated that all information would be provided after he signed the necessary paperwork. The call ended before Thomas could ask any more questions. The address led him to an industrial park on the edge of town, a cluster of anonymous warehouses surrounded by chain-link fencing. Thomas parked in front of a building with no signage, just a number painted on the concrete wall. A woman in a dark suit met him at the door, checked his identification against a tablet, and led him inside without speaking. The interior was sterile and bureaucratic, white walls and fluorescent lights, and locked doors with keypads. They descended in an elevator for what felt like several minutes, going far deeper than Thomas had expected. When the doors finally opened, he found himself in a corridor that looked like it belonged in a military installation. Concrete walls and metal doors, and cameras watching from every corner. The woman led him to a small office where a stack of paperwork waited. Non-disclosure agreements, liability waivers, security clearances, medical releases. Thomas read through them as carefully as time allowed, but the woman made it clear she had other appointments. The documents revealed almost nothing about the facility itself, referring only to sensitive government operations and national security concerns. The pay was listed clearly, as were the terms. Thomas would work 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, for 6-month contracts. He would live on site in provided housing and would not be permitted to leave the facility during his contract period, except in emergencies. All communication with the outside world would be monitored. The compensation for these restrictions was staggering. More money than Thomas had made in the past 3 years combined. He signed everything. The woman collected the papers, made copies, and handed Thomas a badge with his photo and a number. No name, just a number. She explained that he would be escorted to his quarters and given 4 hours to rest before his first shift began. Training would be minimal, she said, because the work was straightforward. Keep the facility clean, maintain supplies, respond to maintenance requests. A supervisor would provide specific instructions. Then she handed him a small laminated card, and her expression changed slightly, the professional mask slipping for just a moment. "Memorize this," she said quietly. "Follow these rules exactly. Do not ask anyone about them. Do not discuss them with other staff. Just follow them." Her intensity was unsettling, but before Thomas could respond, another person in a suit arrived to escort him to his quarters. The living area was a small concrete room with a bed, a desk, a bathroom, and a door that locked from the outside. Thomas sat on the bed and examined the laminated card. The rules, it said across the top in bold letters. Below were 15 numbered items, each one stranger than the last. Rule 1 stated that Thomas was to clean all public areas of the facility between the hours of 8 in the evening and 8 in the morning. He was to avoid occupied offices and labs during these hours, unless specifically requested. Rule 2 specified that certain doors were marked with red tape and must never be opened by janitorial staff under any circumstances. If Thomas found a red taped door open, he was to immediately leave the area and report it to security. He was not to look inside the room or attempt to close the door himself. Rule 3 stated that if Thomas heard screaming coming from behind any door, he was to continue his work and ignore it. Screaming was a normal part of facility operations and did not require intervention. Rule 4 was explicit. If Thomas encountered anyone in the corridors after midnight who was not wearing a badge, he was to immediately turn around and walk away without speaking or making eye contact. He was not to report these encounters or discuss them with anyone. Rule 5 instructed that all cleaning must be completed with approved supplies from the janitorial closet on level 3. Thomas was never to bring in outside products or use chemicals found elsewhere in the facility, even if they appeared identical to approved supplies. Rule 6 stated that certain areas of the facility would appear on his cleaning schedule, but would not appear on any maps or directory. Thomas was to follow the written directions provided and not attempt to determine where these areas were in relation to the rest of the complex. Rule 7 was unsettling. If the lights in any corridor began to flicker in a pattern of 3 short and 3 long flashes, Thomas was to stop moving, close his eyes, and count to 100 before continuing. He was not to look at the walls during the flickering. Rule 8 warned that sometimes residents of the facility would make unusual requests, such as asking Thomas to clean the same area multiple times, or to clean in oddly specific patterns. He was to comply with all such requests without question and without attempting to understand the purpose. Rule 9 stated that the elevator would occasionally display floor numbers that did not officially exist. Thomas was never to press these buttons or exit on these floors, even if the elevator stopped there on its own. Rule 10 was direct. If Thomas found substances that resembled blood in areas that were not medical facilities, he was to clean them using the yellow labeled bottles from the supply closet, and was to file a report using Form 7-3. He was not to speculate about the source of the substances. Rule 11 instructed that any objects found in corridors or rooms that appeared to be personal belongings should be left exactly where they were found. Thomas was to clean around them, but never move them or pick them up, even if they obstructed his work. Rule 12 stated that if Thomas ever felt an overwhelming urge to open a particular door or explore a particular corridor, he was to immediately leave the area and request reassignment for that shift. These urges were not natural and should not be indulged. Rule 13 warned that Thomas might occasionally see people he recognized from his life outside the facility. He was not to approach them, speak to them, or acknowledge them in any way. These people were not who they appeared to be. Rule 14 was emphatic. If anyone ever told Thomas that the rules were just bureaucratic nonsense and could be safely ignored, he was to report that person to security immediately and refuse to work with them again. And Rule 15, printed in larger text at the bottom, simply stated, violation of these rules will result in immediate termination of employment and memory adjustment procedures. There will be no warnings or second chances. Thomas read through the list a dozen times during his rest period, trying to make sense of what kind of facility would require such bizarre protocols. The implications were disturbing. Screaming as a normal part of operations, floors that did not officially exist, people who were not wearing badges wandering the corridors at night, substances resembling blood in non-medical areas. What exactly had he signed up for? But the money was real. His apartment lease was expiring, and he had nothing to go back to anyway. He decided to treat it like any other job. Follow the instructions, do the work, don't ask questions. His supervisor was a tired-looking man named Davis, who met Thomas at the janitorial closet on level 3. Davis showed him the supplies, explained the cleaning schedule, and demonstrated how to use the industrial equipment. He spoke in a monotone, as if he had given this orientation 1,000 times. When Thomas asked what kind of research the facility conducted, Davis just shook his head. "You will see things," he said. "Ignore them." When Thomas asked about the rules card, Davis's expression hardened, You read it. That is all you need to know. Never talk about it. Never break them. People who break them do not last long here." Then he handed Thomas a cart loaded with supplies and a tablet displaying the cleaning schedule, and left without another word. Thomas started on sublevel 2, a long corridor lined with offices and small laboratories. Everything looked normal at first, just ordinary workspace that happened to be underground. He mopped floors, emptied trash cans, wiped down surfaces. A few people were still working in their offices despite the late hour, and they barely glanced at him as he cleaned. He finished the corridor and moved to sublevel 3, where the atmosphere changed noticeably. The walls here were older, the concrete stained and patched in places. The lighting was dimmer, and the air smelled of chemicals and something else he could not identify. Something organic and unpleasant. He found his first red-taped door on sublevel 4. It was unmarked, except for the bright red tape across the frame, and Thomas could hear a low humming sound coming from behind it. He gave it a wide berth and continued cleaning, trying not to think about what might be inside. As he worked his way through the level, he found 2 more red-taped doors, both of them silent. One had scratches on the metal surface, deep gouges, as if something had tried to claw through from the inside. Around midnight, Thomas was cleaning a junction where 3 corridors met when he heard footsteps approaching. He looked up to see a man walking toward him, dressed in a hospital gown and barefoot. The man was not wearing a badge. Thomas remembered Rule 4 immediately. He turned his cart around and walked away quickly, not looking back, his heart pounding. Behind him, the footsteps followed for a moment, then stopped. Thomas did not turn around to check if the man was still there. The screaming started an hour later. Thomas was mopping a hallway on sublevel 5 when he heard it, a woman's voice shrieking in agony from somewhere nearby. The sound was muffled by the walls, but unmistakable. Every instinct told him to help, to find the source, to do something. But Rule 3 was clear. Screaming was normal. He was to ignore it. Thomas kept mopping, the rhythm of his work mechanical, as the screams continued for several minutes before finally cutting off abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. His first shift ended at 8 in the morning. Thomas returned to his quarters exhausted and disturbed, unable to shake the sounds he had heard. He lay on his bed and tried to sleep, but images of the badgeless man and the red-taped doors kept surfacing in his mind. Eventually, he drifted into an uneasy rest, dreaming of endless corridors and doors that led nowhere. The pattern repeated over the following weeks. Thomas worked his 12-hour shifts, following his cleaning schedule, obeying the rules. He encountered more people without badges, always turning away as instructed. He heard screaming almost every night, sometimes from multiple locations. He cleaned substances that resembled blood more often than he wanted to think about. using the yellow labeled bottles that smelled like industrial bleach mixed with something acidic. He learned to recognize which areas of the facility felt wrong, where the air was colder or the shadows seemed darker. The flickering lights appeared for the first time in his third week. Thomas was cleaning a corridor on sublevel 7 when every light began pulsing in that specific pattern. 3 short flashes, 3 long, repeated over and over. He stopped immediately, closed his eyes, and began counting. 1, 2, 3. The urge to look was overwhelming. He could sense something in the hallway with him, something large moving in the darkness between flashes. 4, 5, 6. His skin crawled with the certainty that whatever it was getting closer. 7, 8, 9. He forced himself to keep counting, keep his eyes closed, even as he felt air movement like something passing inches from his face. 10, 11, 12. The counting seemed to take forever. Finally, he reached 100 and opened his eyes. The lights had returned to normal, and he was alone in the corridor. But his cleaning cart had been moved 10 feet down the hall, and there were wet footprints on the floor he had just mopped. Footprints that looked like they belonged to something with too many toes. Thomas cleaned the prints and continued working, hands shaking. He was beginning to understand that this facility was not a normal research installation. Something else was happening here, something beyond classified projects or government experiments. The rules were not bureaucratic caution. They were survival protocols. The non-existent floors presented themselves in his 4th week. Thomas stepped into the elevator to go from sublevel 6 to sublevel 3. But when the doors closed, the panel lit up showing floors that were not on any map. Sublevel 12, sublevel 18, sublevel 23. The elevator began to descend without input, passing the floor where Thomas had intended to go. He watched the numbers climb higher, feeling the descent in his stomach. 12, 15, 18. The elevator slowed at sublevel 20, and the doors began to open. Thomas could see a corridor beyond, but it looked wrong. The walls were not concrete, but something that glistened wetly in dim red light. He jammed his finger on the closed door button repeatedly, and after a heart-stopping moment, the doors shut and the elevator resumed ascending. When it finally stopped at sublevel 3, Thomas stepped out on legs that barely supported him. He started seeing patterns in the requests from facility staff. A scientist on sublevel 4 asked him to clean her lab 7 times in one night, each time specifying a different pattern for how he should move the mop. An administrator on sublevel 2 requested that Thomas arrange the chairs in a conference room in a specific geometric design. A technician insisted that every surface in his workspace be cleaned clockwise, never counterclockwise. Thomas followed each instruction precisely, never asking why. He learned that the people who made these requests looked stressed and frightened, as if the rituals were desperately important. he found his first personal object in his 6th week. A child's stuffed animal, a worn teddy bear, sitting in the middle of a corridor on sublevel 8. Thomas cleaned around it as instructed, trying not to look at it too closely. But the next night, it was in a different location, and the night after that it was somewhere else. The bear seemed to move on its own, always appearing in his path. On the 4th night, Thomas arrived to clean sublevel 8 and found the bear right in front of the door to the janitorial closet. He stepped over it carefully, refusing to touch it. When he came out with his cart, the bear was facing the other direction, as if it had turned to watch him. The urge came suddenly in his 7th week. Thomas was working on sublevel 9 when he passed a door that was not marked with red tape, just an ordinary door with a keypad lock. Something about it drew his attention. He found himself stopping, staring at the door, overwhelmed with the conviction that he needed to open it. That something vitally important was inside. That his entire life had been leading to this moment and this door. His hand was reaching for the keypad before he realized what he was doing. Rule 12. These urges were not natural. Thomas forced himself to turn away and walk back to the elevator. He requested reassignment through his tablet, and within minutes received confirmation that another staff member would handle sublevel 9 for the remainder of the shift. Thomas did not go back to that level for weeks. In his 8th week, Thomas saw his sister. He was cleaning the cafeteria on sublevel 1 when she walked in wearing a lab coat and badge. Sarah, his younger sister who lived 3 states away and worked as a teacher. She looked exactly like his sister, same face, same walk, same mannerisms. She even smiled at him the way Sarah smiled. But Thomas remembered Rule 13. He turned his back and continued mopping, ignoring her completely. The woman who looked like his sister approached him. "Tom," she said, "it is me. Are you not going to say hello?" Thomas kept mopping, his heart racing. The woman moved closer. "Tom, I work here now. I was hoping I would run into you." Still Thomas said nothing. "Please talk to me," she said, and now there was something wrong with her voice, a harmonics that did not quite match human speech. Thomas abandoned his cart and walked out of the cafeteria. Behind him, he heard the Not Sarah thing laugh, a sound like breaking glass. Davis pulled him aside after his shift the next morning. "You followed the rules," he said. "That is good. What you saw was not your sister." Thomas asked what it actually was, but Davis just shook his head. "It does not matter. What matters is you did not acknowledge it. You are learning." 2 months into the job, Thomas had settled into a rhythm of denial and routine. He stopped trying to understand what the facility actually did. He stopped questioning the rules. He simply worked, following his schedule, cleaning what needed to be cleaned, reporting what needed to be reported. The money accumulated in his account, more than he had ever saved. He told himself he could endure anything for 6 months. Then he he met Marcus, another janitor who worked the opposite shift. They crossed paths one morning during shift change, and Marcus struck up a conversation. Marcus had been working at the facility for 2 years. He said, across 4 different contracts, he had learned all the tricks for making the work easier. Thomas asked if he had any advice, and Marcus shrugged. The rules are mostly nonsense, he said. Bureaucrats covering their asses. I bend them all the time and nothing happens. You are making the job harder than it needs to be. Thomas remembered Rule 14. He excused himself and went directly to security, filing a report about Marcus's statements. He felt guilty, like he was betraying a potential friend, but the rules had kept him safe so far. 2 days later, Marcus was gone. Davis mentioned it casually. Marcus violated protocols. He has been terminated. We have a replacement starting next week. The way he said terminated made Thomas wonder if it meant more than just fired. The replacement was a woman named Kelly who looked shell-shocked through her entire first week. Thomas tried to warn her without breaking the rules himself, emphasizing the importance of following all protocols exactly. Kelly nodded, but he could see the skepticism in her eyes. She thought he was being paranoid. On her 4th night, Thomas found her standing in front of an open red-taped door, staring inside. He grabbed her arm and pulled her away, but she had already seen whatever was in there. Her expression was blank, eyes unfocused. Thomas reported it immediately. Kelly was gone by morning. The new replacement lasted even less time. He broke Rule 4 on his 2nd shift, following a badgeless person down a corridor despite warnings. The security footage showed him walking into a maintenance area after the figure. He never came back out. When Thomas asked what happened to him, Davis simply said he had quit and left the facility, but Thomas had been to that maintenance area. There was only one entrance and no other exits. Where had the man gone? Thomas hit the halfway point of his contract in his 3rd month. 3 months done, 3 to go. He celebrated privately in his quarters, checking his bank account and dreaming of what he would do when he got out. Pay off his debts, get a real apartment, maybe take a vacation somewhere with sunlight and open sky. The facility felt more oppressive every day, the weight of the earth above him, a constant presence. He had not seen the sun in 3 months, had not breathed unfiltered air, had not spoken to anyone from his old life. The isolation was becoming harder to bear than the strange occurrences. But the occurrences were escalating too. Thomas started seeing things that the rules did not cover. Shadows that moved independently of any light source, corridors that seemed longer than they had been the day before. Sounds like whispers coming from the ventilation system, almost forming words. He mentioned these to Davis, who looked troubled. That means they are noticing you, he said. You have been here long enough to register to them. Just keep following the rules. Do not interact. Do not acknowledge. You will be fine. Who are they? Thomas asked. Davis hesitated, then leaned in close. No one knows exactly things that live in the deep places. Things that were here before we built this facility. We built on top of something old, something that does not want us here. The rules are an agreement. We follow certain protocols, and they mostly leave us alone. Mostly. But the longer you are here, the more they become aware of you. Some people attract more attention than others. Davis straightened up. You have 3 months left. Keep your head down, and you will make it. The attention manifested in disturbing ways. Thomas began finding objects arranged in patterns outside his quarters. Small stones, bits of wire, drops of liquid that might have been water or might have been something else. The patterns changed every day, growing more complex. He never saw who left them. He started having dreams about the deeper levels, the ones that were not supposed to exist. In the dreams, he was walking down endless stairs, going deeper and deeper, while voices called his name from below. The dreams felt less like imagination and more like memories of something that had not happened yet. His cleaning schedule started including locations that did not make sense. Thomas would be directed to clean a storage room on sublevel 14. But when he got there, the room would be gone, or he would find a door where no door should be, opening into a space that seemed too large to fit within the facility's footprint. He cleaned these impossible spaces as directed, trying not to think about the geometry that should not work. In his 4th month, Thomas encountered something in a corridor on sublevel 11 that made him question his sanity. He was mopping when he reached a section where the floor seemed to slope downward at an angle that made his eyes hurt. The perspective was wrong, as if he was looking at the hallway through a distorted lens. He stepped into that section and immediately felt dizzy, his sense of up and down scrambling. He pushed his cart forward and watched it roll uphill, defying gravity. Thomas backed out of the section quickly and marked it on his tablet as hazardous. Davis messaged him an hour later. Good catch. That area is unstable. Avoid it until further notice. But what did unstable mean in this context? Structurally unsound, or something stranger? The facility staff were changing too. Thomas noticed that people who had been friendly in his first months now avoided looking at him. They hurried past when he cleaned their areas, as if his presence made them nervous. Davis explained that it was not personal. Workers who lasted more than a few months became marked in ways that others could sense. You carry the attention of the things below, he said. It makes people uncomfortable. They know you have been noticed, and they do not want that attention spreading to them. Thomas started having physical symptoms, headaches that came on suddenly and lasted for hours. A persistent feeling of being watched. Occasional moments of lost time where he would suddenly realize he was somewhere different than he had been moments before, with no memory of moving. Davis told him these were normal adaptation responses. Your mind is adjusting to the environment. "It will pass." But Thomas was not sure it was adjustment. It felt more like deterioration. In his 5th month, Thomas experienced his first major rule violation that was not his fault. He was cleaning a laboratory on sublevel 6 when the lights failed. The emergency lights did not come on. He was plunged into absolute darkness. Thomas froze, remembering the rule about flickering lights, but uncertain if complete darkness required the same response. Then he heard breathing in the dark with him, slow, deep breathing that did not sound human. The breathing moved around the room, circling him. Thomas stood absolutely still, barely breathing himself, hoping that immobility would protect him. Then a voice spoke from the darkness. "Do you know what we are?" It sounded curious rather than threatening. Thomas did not answer. "We are the old tenants," the voice continued. "You are guests in our home, temporary guests. We allow you here because we find you interesting, but guests can become unwelcome." Thomas remained silent, though every nerve screamed at him to respond, to run, to do something. After what felt like an eternity, the breathing moved away and the lights flickered back on. Thomas was alone in the lab. He finished cleaning on autopilot and reported the power outage. Davis listened to his account and nodded grimly. "You did well. Never speak to them. That is not written in the rules, because we hoped it would not be necessary. But now you know." Thomas crossed into his final month with a mixture of relief and dread. He was so close to finishing his contract, to escaping this underground nightmare, but he had seen what happened to people who got careless near the end, who thought they had made it and let their guard down. He redoubled his focus on the rules, following them with obsessive precision. The facility seemed to sense his impending departure. The phenomena intensified. Thomas saw badgeless people almost every night now, figures that ranged from almost human to clearly impossible, bodies with wrong proportions and movements that defied physics. The red-taped doors were opening on their own, and though Thomas never looked inside, he could hear things moving in those rooms, sounds that should not exist. The screaming was constant now, coming from everywhere, overlapping voices in endless agony. His last scheduled shift took him to sublevel 21, a floor he had only visited once before. The cleaning schedule directed him to a specific room at the end of a long corridor. Thomas pushed his cart down the hallway, noting how the temperature dropped with each step. The room at the end had no door, just an empty frame opening into darkness. His instructions were to clean the floors of that room, but when Thomas shone his flashlight inside, he saw that the room had no floor, just a pit that descended into blackness with no visible bottom. He stood at the threshold for a long moment, trying to understand what he was supposed to do. Then he noticed writing on the wall next to the doorway, scratched into the concrete. The final test. Do not enter. This is the line. Thomas stepped back from the doorway and marked the area as inaccessible on his tablet. Within seconds, Davis messaged him. "Good, you passed. Come back to level 3. Your contract is complete." Thomas found Davis waiting in the janitorial office. The older man actually smiled, an expression Thomas had never seen on his face before. "You made it," he said. 6 months without a major violation. That makes you one of the few." Thomas asked how many people completed their contracts. Davis's smile faded. "Maybe 1 in 5. Most quit or violate rules within the first month. Some disappear. Some have to be removed for their own safety or the safety of others. But you followed the protocols. You trusted the rules even when they made no sense. That takes discipline." Thomas was escorted through a series of checkpoints and medical evaluations. He was debriefed by serious people in suits who asked detailed questions about everything he had experienced. They seemed satisfied with his answers, particularly when he said he understood the need for secrecy and had no intention of discussing the facility with anyone. Finally, he was taken to an office where a woman who introduced herself as administration offered him a contract extension. "Double salary," she said. "Shorter shifts. Better quarters. We need experienced staff." Thomas did not even consider it. He politely declined and signed the final discharge paperwork. They put him through what they called reintegration, which turned out to be a series of psychological sessions designed to help him readjust to normal life. A therapist explained that extended time in the facility could create difficulties connecting with everyday experiences. Thomas would need to take things slowly, avoid crowds at first, give himself time to remember what the surface world felt like. They offered him medication to help with the nightmares, but Thomas refused. He wanted to process everything clearly, to remember and understand what he had survived. On his last morning, Thomas was escorted back to the surface by the same woman in a dark suit who had brought him down 6 months earlier. The elevator ride felt shorter going up, or maybe time had simply changed for him. When the doors opened and he stepped into the warehouse, sunlight was streaming through the high windows. The brightness hurt his eyes, and he had to shield his face. The woman handed him a final packet of papers, release forms, and tax documents, and a new non-disclosure agreement. Then she shook his hand. "Very few people complete a full contract," she said. "You should be proud. Whatever you do next, you will have proven you can survive anything." Thomas stepped outside into a spring morning. The sun was warm on his face, and the air smelled of grass and rain and freedom. His car was still in the parking lot where he had left it, covered in dust and pollen. He sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, just breathing fresh air and watching clouds move across the sky. His phone, which had been in a storage locker for 6 months, had hundreds of notifications. Messages from his sister, from old friends, from bill collectors. Evidence of a life that had continued without him. He drove home slowly, relearning the feeling of moving through open space. His apartment was exactly as he had left it, sealed by the facility staff who had paid his rent during his absence. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust. Thomas opened all the windows, letting light and air flow through. He looked at his bank account and saw the accumulated wealth from 6 months of work. He could take his time finding a new job. He could afford to be careful about what he chose next. But that night, lying in his own bed for the first time in half a year, Thomas could not sleep. The silence of his apartment was wrong. No humming from machinery, no distant echoes of footsteps, no screaming from behind walls. The darkness was too complete, without the harsh fluorescent lights he had grown accustomed to. He kept expecting to hear breathing in the dark with him, or to see badgeless figures standing in his doorway. Every sound from the street outside made him tense, waiting for something impossible. The nightmares were worse than anything he had experienced in the facility. In his dreams, he was back in the corridors, but now he was violating all the rules at once. Opening red-taped doors, following badgeless people, pressing buttons for non-existent floors. And the things he unleashed in those dreams were worse than anything he had actually encountered. He woke multiple times each night, drenched in sweat, convinced something was in his room. Thomas tried to return to normal life. He applied for jobs, met with friends, visited his sister. But he could not shake the feeling that he was being watched. Sometimes in crowds, he would see faces that looked wrong, people who moved just slightly off, who might have been human, but might have been something else. He found himself following the rules even though he was no longer in the facility, avoiding certain doors, not making eye contact with people who felt wrong, counting to 100 when lights flickered. His sister noticed the changes. "You seem different," Sarah said over dinner one evening. "Like you are somewhere else even when you are here." Thomas tried to explain that he had been working in a stressful environment and needed time to readjust. But how could he tell her the truth? That he had spent 6 months in an underground installation built on top of something ancient and hungry. That he had learned there were things sharing the world with humanity that most people never saw. That he now carried the attention of those things and might for the rest of his life. Weeks passed, and Thomas struggled to find purpose. The jobs he interviewed for seemed meaningless after what he had survived. Customer service, data entry, how could he care about such things when he knew what existed in the deep places? He started sleeping during the day and staying awake at night. When the darkness felt more appropriate, he withdrew from friends who did not understand why he had changed. 2 months after leaving the facility, Thomas received an email. The message was from Davis, just checking in. "How is the surface treating you? If you need to talk to someone who understands, you have my number." Thomas realized he desperately needed exactly that. He called Davis, and they talked for 2 hours, sharing experiences, comparing adjustments. Davis had worked at the facility for 5 years before finally leaving. He explained that it took time to feel normal again, but the feeling of being watched would fade eventually. The things below had long attention spans, but short interest. As long as Thomas did not draw attention to himself, did not seek them out, they would eventually forget him. But what were they? Thomas asked. What was that place really? Davis sighed on the other end of the line. No one knows for sure. The official story is that the facility conducts classified research, and the strange occurrences are side effects of experimental technology. The unofficial story is that we built the installation on top of a very old place, a site that had been avoided by indigenous peoples for thousands of years. Whatever lives there, it existed long before humanity. The facility is an attempt to study it, contain it, maybe even communicate with it. The rules are the result of decades of trial and error, learning what keeps people safe. Some rules were written in blood. Thomas felt a chill, so we are just living on top of them. All over the world. Davis laughed without humor. Probably. Most people never notice because most places are not like the facility. The boundaries are stable, but sometimes we dig too deep or build in the wrong places. Then the boundaries weaken and things slip through. The facility is one of the places where the boundary is very thin. That is why the rules are so important there. That is why so few people can last. Slowly, Thomas began to heal. The nightmares decreased. The sense of being watched faded. He started to reconnect with normal life, finding small pleasures in sunlight and fresh air and simple conversations. He got a job at a library, something quiet and undemanding. He started sleeping through the nights again. The money from his contract allowed him stability he had never known before. But he never forgot. On some deep level, Thomas remained changed by his 6 months underground. He was more cautious now, more aware of the strange things at the edges of the world. He noticed things other people missed. The man in the subway who never blinked. The door in an old building that was always cold to the touch. The moment when shadows moved independently of their sources. He learned to look away from these things, to not draw attention. He followed invisible rules that kept him safe in a world that was stranger than most people realized. A year after leaving the facility, Thomas received a letter. Inside was a new contract offer, this time for a management position, training new janitors, overseeing operations, double his previous salary. At the bottom of the offer was a handwritten note from Davis. We need people who understand, people who survived. Think about it. Thomas put the letter in a drawer and tried to forget about it. But over the following weeks, he found himself thinking about the facility more and more. He had nightmares again, but now they felt like invitations rather than threats. He dreamed of the corridors and the red-taped doors and the voice in the darkness asking if he knew what they were. He lasted 3 more months before he called the number on the letter and accepted the position. His friends and family were confused why he would take another contract with the mysterious company, especially in a management role that required even more time underground. Thomas could not explain that he needed to go back, that he felt incomplete in the surface world, that he understood the rules and the things they protected against, and someone had to help others learn, that he had become part of the boundary between worlds, and the boundary was calling him home. When Thomas descended in that familiar elevator, deeper and deeper into the earth, he felt a strange sense of relief. The darkness and the close walls and the constant hum of machinery were comforting now. This was a place where the rules were clear and the dangers were known, where honesty about what lurked in the shadows was required, where he did not have to pretend the world was entirely safe and rational. Davis met him at the bottom and smiled. "Welcome back," he said. "Welcome home." And Thomas understood that he had found his purpose in the most unlikely place, guarding the boundary, teaching others to follow the rules, living in the space between what was known and what could not be understood. It was a strange calling, but someone had to answer it. Someone had to stand in the deep places and maintain the agreements that kept both sides safe. Thomas had survived once. Now he would help others survive too. In the underground facility, where things older than humanity watched and waited, where the rules were written in blood and necessity, where janitors kept more than just floors clean, they kept the boundaries intact. And Thomas Chen had become one of those keepers, choosing to return to the darkness because he understood what lived there, because someone had to, because the work was never truly finished.